Please rise for silent reflection and pledge allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, Jay.
Mrs. Cynthia?
Here.
Mr. Diver?
Here.
Mrs. King?
Here.
Mr. Schuler?
Here.
Mr. Tinkin?
Here.
Mr. Vorbach?
Here.
And Mayor Mechanica.
Here. Please read the Open Public Meeting Act.
Pursuant to the requirements of New Jersey's Open Public Meetings Act, notice of this meeting was included in the annual meeting notice filed in the office of the Borough Clerk, posted on the Borough website and in the municipal building, and published as a legal notice in the Co-Star newspaper, as well as mailed to those requesting notice and providing payment in accordance with Borough policy.
Thank you. Need a motion to approve the agenda?
Do we need to make an amendment?
If it is the intent to introduce the budget, and related to that would be the introduction of the cap rate ordinance, then that should be included.
I'll make that motion to amend the agenda to include the cap bank ordinance and to introduce the budget.
We have a second?
I'll second it.
Any questions?
This will be
On this
to allow us to go over the 2%?
2%, 3.5.
Okay, understood.
It would also, although we don't anticipate the need for that this year, it allows us to bank it for future. It's a good budget practice regardless of whether we need it in the current year.
Correct.
Any other questions? Roll call, Jay.
Mrs. Cynthia?
Yes.
Mr. Diver?
Yes.
Mrs. King?
Yes.
Mr. Schuler?
Yes.
Mr. Tinkin?
Yes.
Mr. Vorbach?
No.
Thank you. No presentations at this time. No public hearings scheduled at this time. At this point in the meeting, we have the first voice of the public on agenda items only. They step forward, give your name and address. If you'd like to speak on any agenda item. Seeing no hands, I need a motion to close the first voice of the public.
Make that motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Discussion items. We have the 2013 municipal budget. CJ has the highlighted item.
Yes, Mayor, would you like me to go through the worksheet that's been provided? And I think for those that were here last year, you may be familiar with the 10-page version of the 50-page budget. This reflects the revenues and appropriations for the current fund, which is tax supported, as well as the water sewer utility fund, which is fee supported by the fees charged for water and sewer usage. And then the final part of the budget is the Municipal Open Space, Recreation, Farmland, and Historic Preservation Trust Fund. If I may, I'll go through. Pages 1 and 2 are technically not part of the budget. However, they provide us with summary information as well as statistical information and analysis that I believe makes understanding the budget easier. It also provides us with some mileposts as far as where we are, where we've been, where we're going, and where we are in the current year in terms of various aspects of the borough's financial picture. And it may be easiest if I start on page 1 with the budget summary. The first section includes information regarding the fund balance or surplus as it is commonly referred to. For both the current fund on lines 3 to 5 and the water sewer utility fund on lines 6 to 8. Specifically, the budget as presented and reviewed through the Finance Committee reflects the use of $290,000 of surplus in the current fund budget and $200,000 of utility surplus in the utility fund. The next section is the tax levy calculation. Essentially, the way this works is that we add up our appropriations in cap, and they are broken out by salaries and wages and other expenses, and then the third item, deferred charges and statutory expenditures. To that, we also add the various components of the appropriations that are outside of cap. And this is the what is sometimes referred to as either the COLA cost of living cap or the 1977 original cap. This was the cap that was placed on expenditures, not the most recent cap that has been instituted, which is on the tax levy, the amount that can be increased, or the amount of taxes that can be increased from year to year. There you can see at line 24, we have our total appropriations, which essentially reflects the actual spending for the current fund budget. And then we subtract from that our anticipated revenues, and the bottom line then is the amount that's to be raised from taxes. And you can see line 26 has been highlighted. This budget, or this spending, actually, this budget reflects the amount to be raised from taxes will be less than last year. And then the next section, line 28, provides us with a comparison and calculation of the actual tax rate. You can see that based on this proposed budget, the tax rate will not increase and will be flat compared to last year. The next section provides a comparison of our taxable base and for the various components. And this is from our tax assessment record, the vacant land assessment, the total assessment for residential properties, for commercial properties, and apartment properties, and then our total land and improvement assessment. It's worth noting as an aside that you will see that our vacant land assessment dropped by some $2.5 million, but that again essentially reflects the fact that where last year, in 2012, there were 43 vacant parcels in town, and that number has decreased to 39. Essentially, 4 vacant properties were approved last year, so those assessments that were previously categorized as vacant land are now showing up as residential properties. You can see that our total value of residential properties increased by just under $4.4 million. And it's worth noting that that is a net number, even after including the fairly large number of tax appeals that were heard last year. And although individually most of the appeals were either upheld or resulted in slight deductions or reduction in the assessed valuation, the aggregate impact was that our assessed valuation for residential properties actually increased last year. At line 33, there's a comparison of the commercial properties, and again that number remains stable, as did essentially the assessed valuation. The apartment properties, again, we see there a fairly significant, almost $3 million drop in the aggregate value of the apartment properties. And again, you will recall, and we still see the impact of the pending tax appeals on those apartment complexes. The bottom line, before I go to the bottom line, line 36, you'll see that last year there was about $500,000 of telephone personal property. There have been ongoing discussions, and in fact our agenda includes a resolution requested by the League of Municipalities on the ongoing fight to retain the value of business or business personal property that's assigned to the telephone company. So that's why in the 2013 column we're looking at a 0 number for telephone personal property. Now to the bottom line on total assessments. Our total assessed value in town has dropped by just under $1 million. You can see it's almost a statistical blip, less than 1/10%. So even with the net impact of tax appeals at on the apartment complexes, as well as tax appeals on our residential properties, our tax base is remained fairly stable. So that's actually good news. If you recall, in the past couple of years, we've actually seen reductions in our tax valuations. Carrying that information one step further, we've provided a breakdown of the average residential property value, as well as the average commercial and apartment property, and then converting or applying the projected tax rate, calculated what the average residential property will pay. And you can see that based on this calculation, and again reflecting the fact that total residential properties have increased slightly, we're looking at the municipal purpose tax on the average residential property going from $1,534 to $1,539. The reality is that unless your property assessment changed, you won't see any change in your local purpose tax. This really is including the fact that those residential vacant properties are now improved, and we've simply averaged that out over the entire residential tax base. And again, that same comparison is provided for the average commercial property and the average apartment property. Line 46, this is the calculation as to what is the impact of a 1 cent increase in the tax rate. And again, for every 1 cent that the tax rate increases, the average property would pay $51 in additional local purpose tax. The flip side of that is that for every 1 cent increase in the tax rate, $115,584 is generated in additional tax revenue. At line 49 through 58, we provided an allocation where you can see the total taxes. Not just, so far we've only been talking about the municipal purpose tax. Now provided some analysis of the components of your full property tax, including the various county taxes, the local school tax, as well as our municipal tax and our municipal open space tax. Moving on to the second page. That top section, as labeled Reserve for Uncollected Taxes, this is the calculation that is used to determine how much we need to reserve for uncollected taxes. And the best way to explain this is that the reserve is a non-spending appropriation. And it's an appropriation that we include in our budget that is intended to make certain that we, the municipality, have sufficient tax revenue to pay the county, the schools, when their taxes are due to them. And it simply reflects the fact that not everyone pays their taxes on time. And it is worth noting, at line 13, you can see that the presumed collection rate, from 2012 to 2013, there is actually, our collection rate has dropped. Not significantly, and not in an amount that warrants any special notice. But it is worth noting that I would hope to be able to say that as the economy improves, although it's been somewhat sputtering, that we have been fortunate in that our tax collection rate has remained fairly stable. It has dropped.
Still some people out there hurting.
It has dropped. And you can see that even though that is a fairly insignificant, what is that, about a 0.65% drop in the collection rate.
Points, right?
It translates into the fact that this year we will have to reserve about $100,000 more for our reserve for uncollected taxes than we did last year. That number alone amounts to almost 1 penny. But because of the other spending savings and other revenue projections that we've anticipated, we're able to, this budget proposes keeping the tax rate low. But it is worth noting that. At line 17, we start the tax levy calculation, and you can see that with the various items that are both added and subtracted from the amount to be raised from taxes, it is a fairly convoluted calculation. The bottom line is that it tells us how much we are allowed to increase our taxes in the current year. And you can see at line 49 that this proposed budget is some $415,000 below the allowable tax levy cap. So the good news is, and the first thing we'll say is that we don't have a cap levy issue to deal with. Moving on to page 3, this is actually the beginning of the budget document. the current fund anticipated revenues. This reflects the tax-supported operations of the borough. The first revenue that we're anticipating is surplus. Surplus essentially represents unreserved funds that are available to reduce taxes. In the current year, we're anticipating using $290,000 of surplus, and as I mentioned when we started, as indicated on page 1 at the top, we actually have $432,000 of surplus available. $290,000 is being utilized in the current budget that's proposed. And you can also see, for those that are new to the municipal budget process, this budget document reflects in the left column our anticipated revenues for the current year, and then provides us with a comparison of what last year's budget anticipated, and then the third column is what was actually realized from the year before. Surplus, is probably enough said about that. The next section, we start our miscellaneous revenues. And miscellaneous revenues are divided into 7 categories. The first are local revenues for things such as alcoholic beverages, our fees and permits, municipal court revenue, interest and cost on taxes, interest on investments and deposits. It is worth noting that last year in this section we had $293,000 of fire tax reserve, and that was the surplus that the fire district had accrued. And at the time that the district was dissolved and the functions of the fire district were absorbed into the borough, there were $293,000 of their surplus was utilized last year. And that was, again, recognized as a one-time revenue enhancement. The next section are miscellaneous revenues. These are our state aid, and you can see that just under $400,000, essentially flat from last year. And also with the agenda was distributed a couple of weeks ago some information about the level of state aid and how it has been essentially been left flat for the last 10 years. And if it was actually where it should be, that number would be some 40 to 50%. Section 3, miscellaneous revenues at line 29, are uniform construction code fees. You'll see that we're anticipating a higher level than last year. That reflects the fact that last year the rates were increased, and probably before, and maybe perhaps slightly, some of it after Sandy, reflects the additional level of construction activity and the permits that have been issued. Next section, Section D, special items. Here, this is the interlocal agreement that we have, our shared service agreement with the Board of Education for our for the grounds maintenance service that we provide to them. The next section, miscellaneous, Section F. These are our grants, and you'll notice that these have all been left blank. We do anticipate that we will be amending the budget prior to adoption. The numbers from the state have just started to come in. I believe we have received notification of the Clean Communities Award, and one of the, I believe it was the drunk driving, but the balance of these will either be available by the time we adopt and we'll include them, or we'll do what are referred to as Chapter 159 amendments during the course of the year. There is no tax impact for any of these items because these are revenues that are offset with equal appropriations. So it's really just the bookkeeping part of it. Once we receive notification that these revenues, that these grants are available, will be included in the budget. Moving on to the next page, miscellaneous revenue, Section G. Here we have added a number of items that in the past were received but had not been anticipated. And I believe during the course of the year we've had some brief discussions. Specifically, this is where, in an effort to provide a more transparent budget, we are identifying and anticipating the just under $67,000 of cable TV franchise fee, the $110,000 of revenues that are generated from our cellular leases, the $19,000 for the fiber optic franchise fee, The next item, the FEMA reimbursement. We are anticipating receiving $175,000 in FEMA reimbursements. As previously reported, we have thus far submitted some $280,000 for FEMA reimbursements. This $175,000 is approximately 75% of what we have submitted for, which is what we anticipate to receive. We are still in the process. This represents our submission to FEMA for debris removal. We are still working on the other categories of reimbursement, which will not come close to this amount. We expect that will probably be in the $80,000 to $100,000 range, and again, we expect that 75% of that will come back to us as a FEMA reimbursement. But we are anticipating that in the budget at this time. Line 12, Open Space Trust Fund debt service contribution. Essentially, this $50,000 represents the $50,000 that the Open Space Trust Fund will be paying towards the debt service on the bond issue that was issued at the end of 2011. As you may recall, for those that were here, I was not, but it is my understanding, having reviewed the documents, that that bond issue included the $400,000 balance that was outstanding on the Fletcher acquisition. So this reflects $40,000 in debt service pay down, as well as approximately $10,000 in interest costs related to that. And we'll talk more about that at the very end of the discussion when we get to our open space trust fund budget. Starting at line 15, this summary is simply a recap of those items that I just went through for the various categories. And the total at line 26. Line 27, receipts from delinquent taxes. These are, again, the amount of taxes that were unpaid as of the end of last year. Most of those, frankly, all of those, we expect to be paid in this current year, and that's where we're anticipating those tax payments. The bottom line, line 29, is the amount to be raised by taxes to support the municipal budget. And then adding that to the other revenues gives us our total revenues of $5.5 million. That's it for the revenue side. You can see, just for comparison purposes, at the end there we've provided a comparison both in terms of actual dollars and percentages with the prior year revenues that we're anticipating. Any questions on revenues, or you want me to jump right into appropriations? I'll go to appropriations. Starting on line 5, again, this is the current fund, which is the tax-supported portion of the budget. Starting here is where we have the individual line items for the various components of municipal operations, and these are divided or categorized as either salary and wages or other expenses. There are changes, some up, some down. At the directive of the Finance Committee Chair, these numbers have been reviewed, and again, in an effort to reduce spending where possible. We have provided for some salary increases along the way. There are some specific items that I should mention. In general, we have started the process of reducing what previously had been an allocation of salaries among various line items. I believe those...
Especially in DPW.
In Public Works, the allocation between the current fund and our utility fund, I think it was mentioned last year that a portion of the council salaries were actually being, quote, charged to the utility budget. We have eliminated that practice to try to make the budget more easily understood, understandable, so that you don't actually need a scorecard to figure out where certain items are being charged.
You don't have to look to the utility budget and the current fund to see what the council person's being paid.
And as we go through it, you'll see that that is particularly true in the area of the public works salaries. Previously, public works salaries had been allocated among street and road maintenance, solid waste collection, vehicle maintenance, and stormwater management. we have consolidated those line items into one public works salary line item. So again, it just makes the comparison year to year more easily understandable, and in an effort to make the budget simpler as well as being more transparent. There are some increases, and when we have a full budget review or hearing, we'll have those cost sheets available for those that have questions specifically. I will point out that municipal clerk salaries are increasing. Last year, and frankly that is due to my arrival, last year I believe my salary was budgeted for only 3/4 of the year. This year represents a full year budget appropriation, as well as an elimination of allocation previously of the deputy clerk's salary that had been apportioned to water and sewer. So we've changed that a little bit to, again, make it a little bit more straightforward. Again, I don't know if there are any questions on any specific line items, but you can see the side-by-side comparison with the prior year. A couple of things I will point out where I think some clarification is helpful. Specifically at line, let's see, emergency management, last year there was a salary for a full year that was provided. Based on the discussions that took place and the change in that appointment this year, that number has been reduced significantly. Likewise, the municipal court. Last year, we were in a transition in municipal court. We had anticipated that the interlocal agreement with Wall Township would be activated sometime early in the year. That ended up not happening once we had all the approvals in place until September. So last year's budget included an appropriation for salary and wages for the court. You'll notice that at line 65, there is no municipal court salary and wage appropriation this year.
So we do pay something to Wall Township.
We do, and because that's an interlocal shared service agreement,
That's later on.
it's reflected later in the budget. But I did want to point out that because it's obviously a drastic reduction. Moving on to page 6, continuing with the appropriations, you will see that at line 12, under Public Works, salary and wages, last year for street and road maintenance, $150,000 was appropriated. This year we are appropriating $672,000, which again reflects the combined salaries for Public Works that previously had been distributed over a number of different accounts. The concept there is not only is that it makes year-to-year comparisons a little bit easier, but also reflects the fact that our Public Works Department, given its size and the complexion of its employees, there is a lot of overlap. Very few employees are assigned to specific duties that would be road maintenance versus sanitation versus buildings and ground maintenance. So
Which is why if you go to line 16, you see that that's at 0 for this year, and line 21 is at 0 for this year, and that's up on $672,000.
Moving down, I think that pretty much covers all of our appropriations. We are anticipating an increase in utility expenses at line 46 based on our.
Jay,
Yes.
excuse me. Can you explain the increase in the fire line 9 other expenses? And the decrease in the salary and wage for the fire. Where did that go as well?
Notice that last year, and again, reflecting the fact that 2012 was the borough's first year as having assumed the responsibilities of the fire district. We had budgeted $150,000 for other expenses, and there was also $25,000 that was budgeted for salaries and wages. That I believe there had been some discussion about creating a paid position to provide some coordination within the fire department. As the year progressed, that turned out not to be necessary, and as a result, we ended up transferring in those funds to the other expense line, and so the total amount spent last year was just under $165,000. based on our continuing review and reflecting also the fact that last year's transition and the end of 2011, there were charges that had been deferred by the fire company because of the what I would call turmoil in the transition and the dissolving of the district. So there may in fact be, last year may have been a spike up, but we're closely monitoring that to ascertain. In any event, for the current year, we have budgeted the same money that was previously allocated between salary and wages and other expenses. Now it's just other expenses.
It should give us about $11,000 cushion then.
It should, that's correct. And again, fire service is one of those lines where there are certain expenses that can be deferred until the end of the year. There is a certain element of consumables based on the level of fire activity. But again, this is relatively new for the borough, and we continue to transition into a fully integrated operation. Any other questions on? I should note also at line 52 on that page that the Hurricane Sandy recovery expense, last year there was nothing appropriated for that, but in the middle column there we did have two separate emergencies that totaled $140,000. So this is again the bookkeeping aspect of the budget for this year reflects last year's actual dollars spent. Our total operations within CAPS, you can see, is at $3.9 million, $3,949,000. Lines 57 through 59 are not additional appropriations, but are rather just a recap of what we've just gone through with a subtotal of the salary and wage portion and the other expense portion. Moving on to page 7, we have our deferred charges, essentially our contributions for Social Security, the PERS, the Public Employees Retirement System, as well as the Police and Fire Retirement System.
Can you explain that spike there, Jay, so everybody's aware?
Sure. And specifically, you'll see that there's actually a slight increase in the PERS. The PFRS is showing an increase from $218,000 to $261,000. The pension funds are operated and maintained by the state. We essentially receive a bill from them that says, here's your pension contribution. That's what this represents, is what that we've been told we will pay this year. And it is my understanding that on the PFRS side, this essentially reflects a full year, or I should say the full annual contribution for pension costs, where over the last several years there was, well, for lack of a better term, I'll call a pension holiday that had been declared during the last few tough budget years. The state legislature has provided for a phasing in of full funding.
So that 43,000 spike is really a catch-up ball.
Exactly.
Right. It's sort of like, if you can analogize that, it's similar to what we just had on the federal level with Social Security, the payroll holiday.
And again, with the current meeting agenda, there was a distributed information on from the state that they had requested or directed that be distributed to the mayor and council that shows what the state has projected are the pension savings as a result of the pension reforms that have been enacted over the last 3 years. I won't comment on the numbers other than to say they are from the state and they are what they are. Moving down, line 21, these are our operations that are excluded from CAP. And you can see that this is, again, related to the discussion regarding the DPW salaries. In years past, $116,000 was allocated as stormwater management, which was an outside of CAP category. We have, what I would say, we're kind of biting the bullet, putting that appropriation back inside the CAP as a result of our desire to consolidate public works salary and wages basically into one line item. The other appropriations there are somewhat self-explanatory. Moving down, starting
Except for the other expense.
Other expense for stormwater management?
Yeah, it's under the salary and wages, then line 24.
2,400?
Yeah, you know,
Okay,
frankly,
don't worry about it.
we could reallocate that, although I think that may actually put us over our budget cap.
Okay.
That may be something to look at for next year. And actually, I stand corrected. That cost is actually the cost of the annual preparation of the stormwater management report, which is done by our engineer. So that is an actual expense that's charged.
Is that above and beyond the amount that we pay the engineer?
The engineer, we pay him no salary, but rather we pay him based on services provided as engineer.
Okay.
Mr. May also serves as our code officer. So those times, this would not be something that would be covered under his
Agreement.
code services.
Above and beyond the agreement.
That's correct. Moving down at line 39, this is where we list our shared service agreements, and again, is a somewhat of an inducement to encourage them. These are all outside of the cap, and these reflect all of our contracts for the various shared service. Specifically, we talked earlier about the Walt Township Municipal Court. Line 51, we're including our contractual amount there for that purpose. And it's worth noting that the next couple lines, in years past, we were actually the provider of the shared service for municipal court to Spring Lane. So this is where we were able to charge most of our court expenses, salary and wages and other expenses, to an outside cap line item. With our now going, with the conversion of us from being a service provider to being a service recipient, we now have no additional expenses other than the contractual amount to Walt Township.
So what's the net difference for us by doing that?
You know, last year, because we only, that change really only happened as of September 1, we don't really have a full year experience. Essentially, though, you can see that we had salary costs last year of
About 50,000, was it?
yeah, it was about 120,000 with pension benefits,
Okay.
and so
adds
there
up.
is a net savings. Our guesstimate was about $60,000, and I think we're going to come close to that.
So it's a wash then.
Well, it's a 60,000 savings
What was it?
in terms of
Were they
actual
paying into
costs.
that or no?
They paid a portion, and that's why I said we don't have a full year to know what our expenses, what the savings are.
Mhm.
But, and I don't honestly know what Spring Lake paid us.
Spring Lake paid, the old agreement, they paid us 50%.
Yeah,
Is that
it was
what?
pretty good.
It was split,
Yeah.
but even so, you still had enormous cost.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look, you know, and actually that would be worthwhile to do.
Yeah, what?
I'll make a note of that. The balance are, as I said, our interlocal agreements. Moving on to page 8. Our private and public and private programs offset by revenues. Again, these are our grants. As we receive the grant allocation, we will fill in out the appropriation, well, not only the revenue, but the appropriation. But there is a net zero tax impact. Lines 30 through 32, again, this is not additional money, but this is simply a recapping with a total breakdown of salary, wage, and other expenses. Line 34, capital improvements. Last year, we budgeted a total of $10,000 for both the capital improvement fund and building improvements. Based on our experience and the fact that we have sufficient funds in our capital improvement fund, and we don't have any additional bonding or indebtedness planned, we have reallocated that into building improvements. And again, that just provides us with greater flexibility for small capital improvements that we do during the course of the year. Municipal debt service. Here you can see there's a $80,000+ drop in our debt service for bond principal. And again, this reflects the new payment schedule under the bond issue that was completed in, I guess, November of 2011. Again, as part of our full budget presentation, we'll talk a little bit more about our projection of debt service, not only for the current year, but for years into the future, and the balance between our utility and our current fund for that.
So with that refinancing, does that actually push it out even further than it would have originally been? I mean, is there a net savings there, or is this actually going to cost us more?
Well, let me answer the question this way. Before the bond issue, the indebtedness that had been authorized was in the form of bond anticipation notes. Bond anticipation notes have a maximum maturity of 1 year that are renewable for up to 10 years. The advantage of the bond anticipation notes is that there's not a lot of upfront cost in terms of the bond issue. The downside is that you're subject to the variation of rates from year to year. Now, in the current market, short-term rates are actually lower than the long-term rate, but who knows where you would be 5 years, 6 years, or 10 years out. The other advantage of the bond issue was that you're able to issue bonds for theoretically for some items up to 40 years, but practically speaking, you do generally about a 15-year max. I believe these notes were issued
They were shorter than that.
for 12 years.
This is for all the equipment and stuff.
That's correct. All the equipment and whatever bond authorization that had been authorized but had not been funded by bonds, it had only been funded by notes. So to answer your question, you do two things. You spread the payment out a little bit longer. You fix the interest rate. Your question about cost, unfortunately, you really won't know the answer to that until you probably get into year 5 or year 8 to see what the short-term interest rates are. I will tell you that in the short term, absolutely, you're paying a little bit more because currently bond rates are less than 1%. I believe that these carry 2 to 3% interest costs for a full 12-year issue.
Okay, thanks, Jake.
Let's see, where were we? And likewise, you can see that there is no interest on notes because we no longer have any notes. All of our indebtedness is in the form of the bonds. Line 47, the capital lease. This reflects the assumption by the borough of the capital lease that
Fire truck.
we acquired with the dissolving of the dissolution of the fire district. This reflects a capital lease that was entered into by the fire district for the purchase of one of the apparatus. And by the way, one of our projects for the current year is to see if the ability of us to perhaps renegotiate or terminate that capital lease because we're able to actually borrow funds at a cheaper interest. I don't know whether the savings would offset the cost of building, but it's something we're looking at.
Yeah, that's good.
Let's see, line 54, deferred charges. Line 56, Hurricane Sandy. Well, let me start first at line 55. Prior years, we had $37,000 plus for two what are called special emergencies, the 2005 revaluation and the 2008-2009 codification programs, both of which are eligible for being considered 5-year emergencies that rather than pay for them in 1 year, you're able to spread that cost over 5 years without actually incurring any debt service. Essentially, the way you do that is you put the money out and our surplus is reserved in an equal amount. This year we have no additional costs for the 2005 revaluation. But last year we did incur the $140,000 emergency for Hurricane Sandy. We were obligated to pay down at the minimum $28,000. So we've done that here, and depending on our FEMA reimbursement, we may accelerate that pay down, so we would not have to make full 5-year payments on that. Moving down, 59 and 60 are simply recaps, totals and subtotals. Line 61, this is where we insert that non-spending appropriation, the reserve for uncollected taxes. So at that worksheet we previously talked about, we calculated what the amount needs to be, and here we've inserted. And you would note that this total general appropriation, $5,508,000 and $152.12, matches our revenues, and therefore the budget is in balance as proposed. Moving on to the water, sewer, utility budget. Again, this is the dedicated budget that is not supported by tax dollars, but rather is supported by user fees in the form of water and sewer billings. In the current year, we are anticipating using $200,000 of the water utility surplus. Rents, we're anticipating the same amount as last year. Likewise on the hydrant service, the miscellaneous revenue, and the shared service with our water operator.
Jay,
Oh, I'm sorry.
you anticipating using 200,000 of the surplus?
Yes. Yes, and if you'd like, I could talk a little bit about that. I was going to mention it actually when we got down a little further. But
Okay.
The water utility budget is still in what I would call a transition year. You all no doubt recall that last year, right around this time, new water rates were implemented with fairly substantial increases. However, those rates were not implemented until, I guess, into May of last year. So we, the borough, did not get the benefit of a full year of billings from those increased rates. And that's reflected in the fact that at line 18, you can see that last year we anticipated $345,000 of rents from those increased fees, but we only realized just under $163,000.
But that was half a year.
That's half a year, correct?
Right. And
Well,
so-
and actually, if
So
you
it
think
should
that,
it should be double. I mean, it should be over $300,000 in anticipated.
well, last year we anticipated pretty close to the full allocation for the year calculation. And again, if you realize that because our utility billing for base charges is billed in advance, we actually didn't see that until July 1. We did see 3/4 of the new rates for excess charges.
Right.
But not in the, I'm sorry, just the opposite.
Yeah.
It's just the opposite. We realized 2/4 of the excess charges, but only 1/4 of, I'm sorry, 3/4 of the base charges.
Right.
But my understanding, is there any way I can request a copy of the transcript for the water hearing, that meeting? Because I distinctly recall that the 35% increase in, I mean, if you take a 35% increase and you look at what the receipts are, 35%, 200,000 and 35%.
Well,
And so I think that this budget is underestimating the anticipated surplus that's going to be in the water budget. Because I distinctly remember him saying it was going to be at least $400,000 in the surplus that was going to be generated by the 35% increase.
and I think that's true on an annualized basis. I'd have to actually sit down and run the numbers myself to satisfy myself as to the calculation for the full year. It is worth noting also, and I say this without knowing for certain what our actual usage was, whether last year was a dry year, a heavy year in terms of our excess charge, and also, frankly, last year's increase that was implemented forced a lot of people to change their water usage patterns. People realized that I guess the rates hadn't changed for, I'm told, 10 years before that. So I think the sticker shock of those new rates
Tax increase.
forced a lot of people to change how they use water and fix leaks and stop irrigation. So again, I have not done a full analysis of that, but and frankly, we also got a little distracted. We had a lot less water than we anticipated during Sandy.
In terms of using
In
it.
terms of actual usage. I don't know what that amounted to in terms of gallons and how that translates into dollars, but the last year was an unusual year for a number of different reasons. But in any event, for the current year, we are anticipating that the combination of rents at line 10 and the rents from increased fees at line 18 is a conservative estimate of what our actual billing should be. And that's frankly one of the reasons that last year we ended up, if you look at line 55, we had an actual deficit in our utility operations. A deficit in the sense that we spent more than we generated in income. So as a result, in this year's budget, we need to fully fund that deficit.
What was that deficit? 'Cause I just have a bunch of X's where that number should be.
No, it's actually the 133,224, which you can see is fairly close to the, if you take,
Oh, they moved it over, okay.
if you take the 160, I'll call it $163,000 at line 18 that was realized above our, quote, regular billing, and add to that the deficit, you can see that you're at that $300,000. We still would have been short because we anticipated 345, but you can see it's certainly, in the big scheme of things, pretty close to where I think everyone thought we would be at the end of the year.
Jay, what's line 12, miscellaneous? Where does that revenue come from?
Everything from interest on utility billing, water connection fees, turn-on, turn-offs, although they're not a significant amount. Most of that is actually connection fees for new construction or renovations. That can add up pretty quickly.
That much money, wow.
And I can provide you with a breakdown of that, how much of it is actually interest. Sure.
Thanks. All the connections.
Moving down to the appropriation side on the utility, salary and wages, other expenses. I will note that at lines 30, 31, 32. You can see there we're looking at $1.1, $2 million, $3 million. That's the money that we essentially pay out to NJSWA, the Water Supply Authority, for the water that we buy. Our sources of water are twofold.
Jay, on line 31, right? There's 700,000 anticipated that we're going to pay to the NJSWA, right?
Right.
But in 2012, we only paid 534,000 and change. So
Yes, and you'll notice that there is a significant amount that was reserved because they bill us, I guess it's actually, I will be honest and tell you that I am not well versed in their billing cycle, but I can see that we have a reserved amount. My guess is that that has since been paid after January, or after December 31st. It was for the fourth quarter that came due after the quarter ended. So we budget for the current year, even though we may pay a portion of it in the following year once the bill
it's
comes
kind of
in.
like an escrow account that we keep in.
You could think of it as in that sense.
The overall charges for the water treatment have decreased?
Yet again, I believe that's based on a historic level or the actual amount from the year before. Each utilities can estimate their charges to their constituents in a couple of different ways. There has also been some changes in the rate structure at the NJSWA, and you will recall that earlier this year we received a notification from SMRSA, South Monmouth Regional Sewage Authority, that they also changed their rates, which were generally an increase, but we're projecting a slight, small reduction in cost. And again, if you want, we can provide you with the backup for that, a more detailed explanation. Essentially, they
need
tell
a lot more
I
backup.
would appreciate that.
Yeah, essentially, they tell us
It's about a
they
$10,000
tell us
decrease.
what the charge will be for the current year.
It's about 10,000 less this year. It's coming, it's a decrease, actually. Okay.
Under capital improvements, you can see that in the past, we budgeted $60,000, a combination of, again, $45,000 for the down payment on improvements and $15,000 for capital improvement fund. Our utility capital account has in excess of $300,000 that has been reserved over prior years. Again, we do not anticipate any new indebtedness on the utility side, so to continue to fund at a level of $45,000 for the down payments is really not needed at this time. Likewise, the capital improvement fund, but there is a need on the utility side. We are developing, and actually implemented last year, a program of replacing meters on a regular ongoing basis, between 5 and 10 meters. I'm sorry, hydrants.
Hydrants, you mean.
Water hydrants. And this is the mechanism to make those sort of individually small and collectively not a lot of money, but at least allow us to, on a more regular, ongoing basis, fund the capital improvements on a pay-as-you-go basis rather than reserve them and then do a bond ordinance.
A
We
lot of those are
replace
antiques.
We replace four every year, right?
Well, last year we replaced, I think, 6. I don't know when before that it was done or how long.
I don't think it was regular before that.
So we've developed a list of about 25 hydrants that are having reached their useful life or are getting close to it. And also last year we had 2 emergency car accidents where hydrants were hit and needed to be replaced. Unfortunately, those aren't necessarily always the ones that
Right,
are ready.
those are the new ones
Yeah.
usually.
Those should be a
It's always
play,
the
right?
newest ones.
Those are paid for
And
by
they-
us.
Just christened.
The newest ones always get hit.
But I should mention, while we're on the subject of capital, that both on the water utility side as well as the current fund side, I see this year as a result primarily of Sandy, where we have been forced, as well as the fact that we hope to receive some funds, to do some capital improvements to improve our sustainability and to provide some mitigation for potential future floods. Our focus will be on those type of projects and utilizing the funding that was provided by that bond ordinance and bond issue at the end of 2011 to do some road and drainage improvements that we don't need to really fund in the current year budget. We have money available, so that will be our focus. In future years, I would like to see us move more towards, and it would be my recommendation that we move more towards a pay-as-you-go, put money aside for some of these capital improvements and replacements, so that we're not in the same position where we were 2 or 3 years ago, where you did the $1.2 million bond to buy garbage trucks, loader, and utility equipment. So we are developing what I would call a schedule of planned replacement in all of our departments for our capital needs. But that is particularly true on the water utility side, where when you talk about replacing one of our wells or painting or replacing one of our tanks or on the sanitary sewer side, a wastewater pump station, you can easily spend $200,000 to $400,000. So developing a more long-term plan towards that is one of our goals for this year. I already covered the debt service. Unfortunately, this year, I covered the debt service on our current side. On the water sewer side, this is a year where we actually see a spike on our water sewer indebtedness.
That's a one-time event, isn't that right? Because the old debt service.
Yeah, apparently this was the 1 year of overlap where we're phasing out the, I believe it's the 2002 bond issue, but we have 1 year of overlap. So in future years, we will see that decline. And again, as part of the full public hearing, we'll have information and some brief discussion about our debt service projections for not only the current year, but 5 to 10 years.
That would have been line 41 you're talking about?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And statutory expenditures, the portion of our PERS, pension costs, Social Security, and unemployment related to our water sewer salaries is included there. The deficit, again, like our reserve for uncollected taxes, this is a non-spending appropriation that essentially, by state regulation, forces us to recognize that last year we spent more on the utility than we actually took in. So the presence of this and the fact that once we adopt this budget, this deficit disappears, will replenish and replenish the surplus up to that level we talked about. In some respects, and actually if you look in our financial statement, the water sewer utility actually has a $240,000 surplus that's available this year. Or, I'm sorry, correct, of surplus. But only 118 of it is available because of this charge against it for last year's operation and deficit. Once that deficit is cleared, then the surplus is freed up. Again, it's just part of the very conservative cash basis of budget preparation that's required by the state.
So in other words, this line 55 item, 133,000, is in essence a placeholder mandated by state accounting regulations.
That's correct. As well as the fact that it, presumably, in the current year, we won't have a cash deficit in the utility, and we won't, this will not occur or reoccur next year. But again,
So we're going from
Surplus.
surplus, I guess was, I forget what it was last year.
last
Pretty
year's,
low.
let's see, last year's utility surplus, I'm showing as, we had 207,000 available. We actually added to that somewhat this year, even with the deficit. However, there's, and that surplus would have been generated from unexpended balances from the 2011 budget year that was canceled, that had been unspent. So again, things could be better on the utility side, but this is still a transition year for us.
We need that full year to really see what
Moving on to page 10, this is our open space recreation farmland trust fund. We anticipate the $115,000, which is the 1 cent tax that's dedicated to open space and recreation preservation, recreation and historic preservation. In the current year, we anticipate, you can see a big increase there in our other expenses. Last year, we budgeted $25,000, which was essentially to fund the demolition and removal of the house at the Fletcher property. In the current year, we expect to spend, or at least we are proposing to appropriate $61,000, which will fund the planned, and I'll be careful how I say this, cleanup of the Fletcher's property. I won't use the word clearing, although we have developed we've had the property reviewed. We've identified the trees that should stay and those that should be removed. And we anticipate that in early May, going out to bid for proposals to remove those trees that should be removed and clear up the site of the 30 years of overgrowth of brush and vines, and for the trees that remain to ensure that they stay healthy. We expect that, frankly, to be anywhere from $40,000 to $60,000. We anticipate structuring the bid so that if the price is above what we have available, we will scale it back some. But in any event, it is the plan to move ahead with that, and that's the purpose of this funding. Moving down, you can see that in the debt service section, lines 33 and following, this is where we are allocating $40,000 of bond principal and $10,000 of interest on the bonds for the payment of our bond issue. And again, that's $50,000 is related to the revenue anticipated in the current fund on page 4, line 12. It's not completely necessary to do it this way, but I think it provides a clear explanation for the council, the public, and provides greater transparency as to how the debt service on the Fletcher property is being reduced, because I know that had been raised in previous, last year during some meetings. That's, I won't say the quick explanation, but that's the explanation of the budget as proposed.
So in essence, all of our open space fund is going to the Fletcher property this year?
That's correct.
And how much money do we have in the open space fund at the moment?
Anticipating that question, let's see if I can quickly find that answer for you. As of the end of last year, December 31 of 2012, it may take me a minute or two to find this. Open Space Trust, $281,000. And you may recall that last year I provided a more complete analysis because we ended up appropriating an amount from that to provide a matching grant for the planned improvements at Alair and Ocean Road Park from Recreation. This reflects the net amount, the $281,000.
So if we go forward with this, then we'll spend all $115,000, that'll leave us with about $166,000 at the end of the year.
Actually, just the opposite. The 281 will remain because we're talking about using the 115 of.
Oh, so we're only taking off new money?
That's correct.
Oh, okay.
You're not taking out of the old money.
In terms of the process, it is my recommendation that the council introduce the budget, and if so, part of that would include the adoption, or at least the introduction of the cap rate ordinance. Due to the various requirements for publication and public hearing, this would schedule our public hearing for our second meeting in May, which is Tuesday the 28th. The other advantage, because there is a fifth Monday this month, that actually gives us 5 weeks between introduction and the hearing date.
You're talking about introducing it tonight?
Yes.
You've given us this. You've given us
Yeah, I think I would
this,
need
and
more
we're going to
information.
introduce the budget tonight. I mean, when I did the budget, I gave that to all the council people, line by line, a stack.
This was the same information that I provided last year.
It's the exact same
And
thing.
I
you did
believe I
last
voted
fall.
no at introduction last year because they didn't have anything.
Again, I'd be more than happy to provide whatever information, additional information you would request or require.
The 50K,
This reflects the revenues, the appropriations that are included in the 50-page document.
we need, what I would like is it's delineated, I mean, what I recall having was everybody's name and salaries and everything, and it went across the board. Do you remember that? And it went across the board, and it even went to, so we could do checks and balances as far as what's in here as far as your social security and everything else. So everything was checks and balances, and you don't,
Excuse me. Excuse me, Judge, do you have that information for Patty?
I don't have it available this evening. The backup material that reflects the various social security calculations that were prepared through payroll and our financial consultant will be available, and would be available either for the public hearing or, I believe last year, and again, I got here late last year, but we held prior to the public hearing, there was a session to go over in detail between introduction and the hearing, a meeting where those items had been requested and provided and received.
So, would we like to do that same format?
You could do the workshop at the next regularly scheduled meeting, the second Tuesday in May, and then do the public hearing at the last.
I would also point out that this is by no means the final budget as to be adopted. We do expect there will be amendments that reflect, number one.
Yeah, I would like to have a more comprehensive
it's
budget.
just a common courtesy that we're supposed to, in our due diligence, supposed to be voting on a budget right now. And last year I also complained, we didn't have budget hearings, I was asking for it.
It'd be good to know what the balances
January,
are.
Just send me mine with budget hearing.
Are they going up, are they going down?
Well, again, the pages 1 and 2 of this budget summary include information that is not included in the budget document itself in terms of the level of surplus that's available, the surplus that is being used, and the surplus that is remaining with the introduction of this budget. I'll provide whatever information, answer whatever questions the council has. Certainly, I understand that the final budget as adopted will reflect some compromises among the council as far as policy decisions, areas that perhaps will receive additional funding or less funding.
This might, this is a little bit like the water tower with the antennas. if you gave us the information, you give us a chance to agree with the budget. We don't, you know, I would like to see, this is a budget summary, I'd like to see a full budget, to be honest with you, but to make me more comfortable.
Well, I don't, certainly I can provide whatever support documents in terms of how the various numbers are calculated. Although in general, I will tell you that with the exception of those items that I believe have been highlighted this evening, these numbers reflect reduced appropriations.
Spending is down.
Not for salary and wages. I mean, nobody, you know, the salaries and wages are going up. Well, I mean, it doesn't, I mean, your one salary is going up almost double. You know,
Well, I can assure you that my salary
and
is not being proposed to be.
I mean, as far as the clerk position, what I recall is the clerk position was $25,000, and the other one was
Actually,
less.
my salary is structured as follows. I am paid $75,000 as the administrator and $10,000 as the clerk. I think as I attempted to indicate, the change in the municipal clerk's salary and wage line item reflects the fact that the full salary for the deputy and my salary as clerk are reflected there.
All right, but I mean, the increase is substantial. Would you agree?
Well,
It's almost double.
The increase in the line item is substantial, but most of that is the allocation of the deputy's salary that previously, a portion of that had been allocated into the utility and into general administration. That salary was split into like four
But
different
do you understand what the problem is? Because nothing's delineated? I mean, we don't have, like I said, but why don't we have the list of everybody's name, what their salaries are, what their benefits are, you know, line item down so that we can have an end figure. We can do the math ourselves. I mean, I can do the math myself and feel confident in voting for a budget that I feel is fair and equitable and it's good for the town. But just, $5 million budget, this is what we get.
Yeah, it's a summary.
$5.5 million budget.
I'm not quite
Well, it's the
sure.
council's decision, certainly. However, the council wishes to proceed. Perhaps I was, when I got here last year, I believe we're following the same process that was followed last year. And
We are.
I recognize and appreciate the fact that not everyone agreed with last year's process.
So if we schedule a budget,
If I could just to recap. It's a zero increase in the tax rate. Non-tax revenues are down 130,000. Tax dollars are down 3,000. We're spending below 2012 spending. We actually are spending less than we spent last
But
year.
it's not, you know,
But let me just finish.
with the
Let me just finish.
Just because of that, we get the.
Spending plan provides for public safety, police, fire, first aid, emergency services. We maintain our infrastructure and public facilities. We fund the community services provided by the borough. The budget also provides continued funding for the existing level of services, no expansion, no reduction in services and/or programs, reflects the objectives and goals of the borough, determined by the mayor and the council, and the borough continues the transition that we started last year. If you go to page 5, and you look at lines 46 and 47, especially line 46, these are the increases we really have to fight, which is the increase in the benefit costs that we pay, especially on health care.
And we just gave, you guys just voted, you're saying this, and you just voted for a golden parachute for 5 years for somebody, that they're gonna be given
health insurance.
benefits, health
Can I finish?
benefits for
Can I
5
finish?
years after, and when they were an at-will
Can I finish?
employee.
yeah,
They were an at-will employee.
We've improved the efficiencies from the use of employees, part-time employees at DPW. There are 3 employees that are not receiving health care benefits, 2 of whom would be receiving family benefits, which would add at least $50,000 in cost here if they were full-time getting full benefits. So we are moving in the right direction towards reducing benefit costs. It's something that we have to look at in other areas, and I think that's something that we're going to be discussing in council meetings in the future, because there are other efficiencies that we can also achieve to further reduce expenses. In terms of, I have no problem with the council getting a full Bible full of information. If that's what, if Tom wants to see a complete breakout of salaries or whatever, if Patty wants to see that, I have no problem with that.
Well, I would say this, that to me, a increase in water rates is a tax increase, but never mind that. If you want to vote on it tonight, go ahead. I just want to have the support until I have all the information.
All we're voting to do, all we're doing tonight is to vote to introduce it. Then we can have a workshop at our next scheduled meeting, and we can have the public hearing at the end of May.
It's
And you have one year
hard for-
Call
it's
the
hard-
vote.
you know,
I'll look for support.
And Jay, you make sure they have all their information.
And the information, as I understand, that they've requested and the backup material that was provided last year, absolutely.
Mhm.
I'm going to send you some stuff by Friday, if it's okay, just have some more items.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
I would make a motion to introduce the 2013 budget and also to introduce the ordinance to establish the cap bank.
You'd have to separate that
I
into
do?
two separate items.
Okay.
So why don't you stick with the motion to introduce the municipal budget to start with?
I'll make a motion to introduce the municipal budget for 2013.
I'll second it.
Tom, any questions? Introduce now. This is introduce the budget.
I think everybody understands how I feel. Okay.
Roll call, Jay.
Mrs. Cindy,
No,
Mr. Diver,
Yes.
Mrs. King,
Yes.
Mr. Schuler,
Yes.
Mr. Tinkin,
No.
Mr. Borbach,
No.
Mayor Mechanic.
Yes.
Okay, it's 4 votes. The
It passes.
introduction passes.
Yes. To introduce, amend, or adopt the budget, it must be approved by not less than a majority of the full authorized membership of the governing body including the mayor. So as long as there are 4 out of 7 including the mayor, it passes.
I'd like to make a motion to introduce the ordinance to establish the cap bank.
I'll second it.
And Mayor, this would carry ordinance number 2013-02.
I'm sorry, dash what, Jay?
02.
02.
And by way of explanation, this ordinance provides for an increase in the 2% cap to 3.5% in the current year, and also provides for a cap bank for any unused portion of the cap to be carried into the future years.
I'm against increased.
Excuse me?
I'm allowed to speak now?
Yes, go. We have questions.
Yeah, I'm against this increasing the cap. The 2% cap was set up for a reason, to stop spending. And if you give the government money, they'll spend it.
Clarification from Jay. In terms of this would require us to vote on and pass an ordinance to go beyond the cap, or no?
This ordinance does 2 things. First of all, as an ordinance, it requires an introduction and a public hearing and final adoption. The purpose of the ordinance is twofold. It increases what's generally referred to as the 2% appropriation cap, allows it to go to the cost of living adjustment of 3.5%, and secondly, adds for the cap, to be banked. So any unused portion of the cap is reserved and is available for 2 subsequent budget years.
Okay, but if you wanted to then go above the 2% cap, let's say we pass this, do you have to then pass another ordinance and vote? No, or this is allowing us, once we pass this, we can just do it?
You can do it as part of the budget. And I would point out that the budget as introduced is actually, our total spending is actually down. Our appropriations within cap are, appropriation within cap are actually, going from $4,400,000 to $4,539,000. But that includes the reallocation of those stormwater management salaries into cap. So essentially, we are well below cap.
No, I understand that, but, down the road, there might be a different council 5 years from now, and they may not want to be below the cap. Is this a yearly ordinance?
This is
Okay.
yearly, this is just for this
And
year.
it's-
Okay.
It's just,
Doesn't affect
It
any.
allows for the increase in the cap for the current year, and allows this cap to be used in this year's budget and 2 subsequent budgets if unused. And again, whether it's used or not, I certainly recommend it as good budget practice, because again, we don't know what will happen next year. There may be costs like health insurance, like utilities. Some years, those sort of extraordinary increases have been recognized as such and have been excluded from the calculation, but there have been other years when they have not been excluded. And the budget is already fairly tight in terms of not only its projection of revenues, but also its spending plan. Again, when you look at a year-over-year reduction in actual dollars being spent, cap is not one of our problems.
It's pretty consistent.
Right, so if it's not one of our problems, why are we doing it?
Again, because I can't predict the future,
Yeah.
and it's,
It may be needed, it may not.
You could have an extraordinary event. In fact, one of the concerns that everybody has coming up in 2014 would be the implementation of the federal health care program. That could cause certain issues to arise as well that you may not expect. And God forbid, we could have another event such as a Sandy. God willing, we won't, but if you had one and say it was worse, well, you have to be prepared. You need tools to deal with a situation that could arise. And this is just a tool to deal with something that could possibly arise. It's not a given that it will. It's extenuating circumstances.
You're concerned we may spend money?
Yep.
You don't know.
As a general
Well,
principle.
but again, this
We're just
ordinance is
called
only,
regulations, you know, I'm not gonna-
but the ordinance is only for this year. That's all I'm saying.
I just don't want to get, shake hands with the devil and you'll never see it again.
I don't think anyone up here is going to.
No, I don't want that. Get too comfortable with raising the cap, I don't like the idea. I didn't mean it to call any of my fellow colleagues here anything other than fine human beings.
We'll try and do what's right.
Understood.
Any other questions? Roll call, Jay?
Mrs. Cindy,
yes.
Mr. Diver,
Yes.
Mrs. King,
Yes.
Mr. Schuler,
Yes.
Mr. Tinkin,
No.
Mr. Borbach.
No.
4 affirmative, 2 negative votes.
And Mr. Bellini, for the record, just so everyone's clear, the public hearing on the budget that's now been introduced is going to be May the 28th?
That's correct.
And the workshop at our next meeting.
And you will have all that information before the next meeting.
Yes.
Thank you, Jim. Do we have any reports at this time, Mr. Tinkins?
Not at this time, Mayor, thank you.
Mr. Borback? Cindy?
We are looking for a bond, grant for the Aller Road Park. There's many trees that have been down due to Superstorm Sandy, and so we are looking into doing something with that area, whether it be a field. There's been talk about a football field.
Where's that, Barry?
Pardon?
Where was this?
Aller Road Park.
Aller Park.
Labor Road, Robertson Park.
Yeah.
That's the old name.
So, just wanna let you know.
Thank you. Ms. King?
Yes. First of all, I would like to read a letter, dear Chief Petrican, just a short note to let you know what a great job you and your crew are doing taking care of the residents of Spring Lake Heights. I want you to know how wonderful Zachary Ramp was the night I called for help. My husband is on oxygen 24/7 and he was in distress. Zach came over and immediately assessed the situation and gave him oxygen and took control. Please thank Zach for us. Sincerely, Barbara Loglio. The other thing I would like to mention is that periodically over the last year, the police department has been doing motor vehicle registration inspections down here on the highway. And because of the process with the county, bringing their trucks and everything and being able to do on-site registration. They have also issued several summonses to various people who have had other vehicle incidents. And in the report for March, they had 459 motor vehicle stops for the month, and 259 of those resulted in summonses, which is quite a large amount. So I just want to thank our police department for doing such a diligent job.
Mayor, can I add to that? I want to thank the chief and the crossing guards. They do a great job with the school kids, and I see the chief out there as well almost every morning.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Anything else?
Nope, that's it.
Mr. Dever?
Enough said.
Mr. Schuler?
No, nothing.
Okay, thank you. Reports, notices, correspondence. Everybody sees that list we have there. Is there anything anyone would like to speak about on it? Okay. New business, no ordinance introduction at this time. Resolutions. We have Resolution R 2013-57. This is for tax refunds and overpayments.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Any questions? Roll call, Jay?
Mrs. Cynthia?
Yes.
Mr. Dibble?
Yes.
Mrs. King?
Yes.
Mr. Schuler?
Yes.
Mr. Tinkin?
Yes.
Mr. Vorbach?
Yes.
Thank you. Resolution R 2013-58. This was the telecommunication tax support.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
I'll do that, second.
Any questions? Okay. Is this what you were speaking about before?
Yes. Yes,
Yeah, they want that.
Mrs. Cynthia?
Yes.
Mr. Dibble?
Yes.
Mrs. King?
Yes.
Mr. Schuler?
Yes.
Mr. Tinkin?
Yes.
Mr. Vorbach?
Yes.
Thank you. Resolution R 2013-59, approving the consent agenda item. Yes. Motion and a second?
Is that the one for St. Catherine?
Yes.
Yeah, I'll make that motion.
Second?
I'll second that.
Any questions? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Cynthia?
Yes.
Mr. Dibble?
Abstain?
Mrs. King?
Yes.
Mr. Schuler?
Yes.
Mr. Tinkin?
Yes.
Mr. Vorbach?
Yes.
Financial resolution, motion to move bills to the Finance Committee.
I'll make that motion.
I'll
Second?
second it.
Any questions? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Cynthia?
Yes.
Mr. Dibble?
Yes.
Mrs. King?
Yes.
Mr. Schuler?
Yes.
Mr. Tinkin?
Yes.
Mr. Vorbach?
Yes.
Resolution R 2013-60, approving the payment claims for April 18th.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
Any questions?
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, April 18th, 2013 bill list.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
I sort of cut it short. Sorry, Tom.
My hearing's going too.
Any
I know how
questions?
you feel.
Any question? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Cynthia?
Yes.
Mr. Dibble?
Yes.
Mrs. King?
Yes.
Mr. Schuler?
Yes.
Mr. Tinkin?
Yes.
Mr. Vorbach?
Yes.
Thank you. This time of meeting, we have the second voice of the public. You may speak on any item. Just step forward and give your name and address. Seeing no hands, I need a motion to close.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
There are no minutes at this time.
Mayor, just if I may,
Okay.
one question. Under the reports and correspondence, there was the request from the Spring Lake Heights First Aid Squad concerning proposed LoSAP changes.
Yes.
I have not had the opportunity to speak to Mr. Raffetto at length, but I believe that this may require an ordinance to do so. Just with the council's permission, I'm going to suggest that it be referred to Mr. Raffetto for preparation of an ordinance if necessary. That way we could start that process for next year.
Thank you, Jay. Fred, you have that? Thank you. Need a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Last meeting was fast. Well, you can tell there was no basketball.
I forgot Joseph there.